At the height of his empire, Kanye West wasn't just a rapper or a fashion icon. He was a symbol of defiance, creativity, and unfiltered expression. With a net worth estimated at over $2 billion, he stood among the financial elite. From sold-out Yeezy sneakers to billion-dollar deals with Adidas and Gap, Kanye had built something that few artists in history had achieved: total financial independence paired with complete cultural dominance. But before the cracks began to show, Kanye seemed untouchable. Paparazzi hounded him, headlines couldn't stop printing his name, and fans, even his critics, paid attention to his every word. Yeezy was more than a brand. It was a statement. And behind the scenes, his partnerships were bringing in nine-figure deals that stunned even seasoned business moguls. In 2020, Kanye publicly declared he was worth $5 billion after signing a 10-year deal with Gap, and Forbes was quick to recognize his billionaire status. Some critics doubted the numbers, but even conservative estimates placed his net worth above $1.5 billion. It wasn't just music anymore. Kanye had entered the room with the likes of Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, or so it seemed. But here's the truth. When you climb that high, the fall is louder. And Kanye, always one to speak his mind, had no interest in playing it safe. What many didn't see was that Kanye's financial power was deeply tied to his brand image, and his brand image, volatile, emotional, and unfiltered, was both his greatest strength and his most dangerous weapon. Companies loved him when he was profitable, controversial, but still under control. But the moment he stopped being controllable, the house of cards began to wobble. It started small. A few tweets here, a strange interview there, a rant during a concert. The world watched, fascinated and disturbed, as Kanye blurred the lines between genius and chaos. Still, no one truly expected what came next. Because the story of Kanye West's financial downfall isn't about losing money. It's about what it costs to speak freely in a world where brands crave obedience more than authenticity. This isn't a tabloid drama. It's a case study, a warning, a tale of ambition, power, speech, and the silent contracts we sign when we choose to become bigger than ourselves. And maybe it's the story Kanye always wanted to tell, just not like this. The warning signs were always there, faint, flickering, and often dismissed as Kanye being Kanye. But behind the headlines, behind the viral clips and tweet storms, something deeper was unraveling. Kanye wasn't just speaking his mind. He was testing the boundaries of how far a powerful black man could go without corporate permission. In 2018, he walked into TMZ and said the words that would haunt him for years. Slavery was a choice. The room froze. The internet exploded. For most public figures, this would have been the end. But not Kanye. He survived, or at least it looked like it. His fan base fractured, critics sharpened their knives, but his music still sold. Yeezy still flew off shelves, and Adidas kept cashing in on the chaos. To the outside world, Kanye seemed bulletproof, but corporate America was watching, and they were taking notes. While Kanye remained one of the most profitable names in entertainment, the foundation beneath him was starting to shift. His behavior became increasingly erratic. Emotional outbursts on live television, presidential campaigns that confused even his most loyal followers, late-night Twitter rants that ranged from visionary to disturbing. Each moment chipped away at the carefully constructed empire, not because Kanye was failing, but because he was becoming unpredictable. And unpredictability terrifies investors. Then came 2022. In a span of months, Kanye's world began to collapse in real time. He made a series of public statements, some politically charged, others disturbingly anti-Semitic. These weren't just controversial, they were radioactive. And in today's hyper-connected, hypersensitive media landscape, there's no PR strategy that can clean up that kind of fallout. Within hours of his comments surfacing, brands that once proudly associated with him began to run. Adidas, his biggest partner and the backbone of the Yeezy empire, issued a statement. "We do not tolerate anti-Semitism or any other sort of hate speech." They cut ties immediately. Just like that, a multi-billion-dollar partnership evaporated. Gap, who had just launched an entire line in collaboration with Kanye, distanced themselves. Balenciaga deleted all Kanye-related content. CAA, one of the biggest talent agencies in the world, dropped him. Even JP Morgan Chase, His bank informed him they no longer wanted to do business with him, not because of overdrafts or fraud, but because of his words. In 48 hours, Kanye lost more than $1 billion in valuation. That's not a typo. $1 billion. Forbes, who had once crowned him a billionaire, quickly revised their estimate. Without the Adidas deal, they calculated his net worth at around $400 million. Still a fortune by any standard, but symbolically devastating for someone who had made his wealth part of his identity. But the true cost wasn't in numbers. It was in isolation. Kanye had always lived on the edge of public acceptance. He thrived on controversy, challenged narratives, broke molds. But now, he was alone, not just professionally, but personally. Friends distanced themselves. Collaborators stayed silent. Even many of his fans didn't know what to do with their admiration anymore. For a man who once said, "I am Warhol, I am Shakespeare, I am Steve Jobs in black skin," the silence was deafening. Still, some whispered, was this collapse truly about hate speech, or was it about control? Kanye, after all, had always been loud, but now he was loud without permission. He wasn't making the system money anymore, he was attacking it. And when you bite the hand that feeds you in public, that hand doesn't just let go, it slaps back hard. But even in the ashes, Kanye refused to apologize in the way the world expected. His apologies came laced with defiance. His interviews were as erratic as ever. He didn't vanish, he doubled down. Because in his mind he wasn't falling apart. He was breaking free. And perhaps that's what makes this story so difficult to tell. It's not just a financial downfall. It's the dissection of a man's soul, brand, and rebellion, all playing out on the biggest stage in the world. Kanye West, the billionaire, was gone. But Kanye West, the dissenter, the outcast, the prophet in his own mind, he had only just arrived. And in the ruins of fortune, sometimes all that's left is fire. In the weeks following the collapse of his corporate empire, Kanye West wasn't just trending, he was radioactive. The media swarmed, headlines multiplied, YouTubers, pundits, celebrities, financial analysts. Everyone was dissecting the same question. What happened to Kanye West? But few dared to ask something more uncomfortable. What if Kanye knew exactly what he was doing? From the outside, it looked like a complete meltdown. But from Kanye's point of view, it was a purging, a burning down of the old world, the world of contracts, quiet censorship, and smiling for cameras that didn't care about your soul. A man who once begged brands to accept him was now walking away from those same brands while they begged him not to ruin theirs. Yet there's a difference between burning bridges and burning oxygen, and Kanye had done both. His name was now so polarizing that even people who wanted to help were too afraid to speak up. In a world that feeds off alliances and silence, Kanye had become unmarketable, not just in a business sense, but in a spiritual one. He was, quite literally, toxic currency. Inside, Kanye began to withdraw. Publicly, he appeared in brief flashes, some cryptic Instagram posts, a few paparazzi moments in odd clothing or new girlfriends. But behind the scenes, something was changing. His tone had shifted. The loudest man in entertainment was getting quieter. And in that silence, the weight of everything he'd lost began to settle. Gone were the chartered private jets filled with designers and collaborators. Gone were the strategy meetings with Adidas, Balenciaga, and Gap. Gone were the late-night texts from other billionaires seeking his opinion, hoping to ride his chaotic brilliance just a little further. And more painfully, gone were many of the people who once claimed to love him. He had spent years building an empire, yet when it burned, it became clear just how many of those bricks were hollow. The world didn't just take his money, it disassembled his identity. And Kanye? He began asking himself questions he hadn't dared to consider before. Was I ever in control? Was the money ever really mine? Was I building something? Or was I being used? In rare interviews, his tone shifted from defiant to reflective. He spoke about God more, about legacy, about being misunderstood. But his thoughts were often fragmented, riddled with contradictions and paradoxes that only deepened the mystery of his mind. Some accused him of mental illness. Others believed he was undergoing a spiritual transformation. The truth was likely both, and neither, because Kanye had always lived in a realm between genius and instability. a realm where clarity was a moving target. Meanwhile, the financial reality began to hit harder than ever before. Without Adidas, the Yeezy brand lost most of its value overnight. Factories shut down, inventory stalled, employees were laid off, lawsuits piled up, new deals were impossible. Even small-scale licensing agreements were poisoned by the association, and the infrastructure that once maintained his billionaire status began to crumble fast. He still owned properties, large estates, real estate in Wyoming, and holdings from previous years. But liquidity was drying up. Cash flow was erratic. Private income was no longer predictable. Kanye West, for the first time in decades, was feeling the cold breath of financial mortality. But the hardest part wasn't the money. It was the mirage of support, the realization that when you stop being profitable to others, you stop existing in their world. Where were the fashion houses now? Where were the collaborators who praised his vision? Where were the politicians who smiled for photos when he was a cultural asset? Silence. And yet, somewhere in that silence, Kanye began to lean into the idea that maybe, just maybe, this was what he needed all along. Not the destruction, not the exile, but the clarity that only loss can bring. Because when the world stops clapping, the only voice left is your own, and you either run from it or you listen. Kanye, it seemed, had finally started listening, but what he was hearing was not comfortable. It was the sound of his own contradictions echoing back at him, loud, unfiltered, and real. He had spoken out to reclaim his voice, but the cost wasn't just financial, it was existential. And now, standing in the ashes, he was beginning to understand that freedom, true freedom, doesn't come from fortune. It comes from surviving fallout and still being able to speak, even if no one's left to listen. In the stillness of his new world, Kanye West began to do what few expected. He stopped performing. For decades he had lived with an audience, on stage, on camera, in interviews, in fashion shows, even in his own home. He had built his name by refusing to fit, but still relied on the world watching. Now, no one was watching, not in the same way. And so, for the first time in years, he stood not before a crowd, but before a mirror. The silence wasn't just external, it seeped inward. It forced him to confront the version of himself that no brand, no deal, no Twitter feed could polish. Kanye had always talked about God, about faith, about destiny. But it was only after the collapse that his spiritual convictions took on a new urgency, not as performance, but as lifeline. He started attending more private services. He leaned deeper into scripture. His Sunday services, once curated for spectacle, became more introspective. His Instagram posts, when they came, oscillated between cryptic symbols and heartfelt prayers. No press releases, no PR team, just Kanye, speaking to something bigger than himself, or maybe trying to. To some, this was yet another phase, a mask, a pivot. But those close to him described a man who had stopped pretending to be at peace and had started searching for it. Because once the applause fades, what remains is not the costume. It's the wound beneath it. And Kanye's wounds were deep. Abandonment, betrayal, ego, shame, childhood trauma, the loss of his mother, Donda, the one person he felt truly understood him. For years, he had tried to build empires in her honor. He spoke of her constantly. Her name became a brand. But now, stripped of it all, her absence returned not as memory, but as a void. In private conversations, he reportedly said things like, "Maybe this was supposed to happen. Maybe I needed to be broken to find what's real." But breaking doesn't guarantee healing. And Kanye wasn't done breaking yet. Because even as he leaned into faith, the world remained skeptical. Every attempt to express himself, even with a softer tone, was met with suspicion. Is this an act? Is he planning a comeback? Is he seeking redemption or relevance? The public didn't know what to make of him, and perhaps neither did he. One day he was photographed walking barefoot in the streets of Los Angeles, wearing robes and a blank expression. Another, he appeared at a listening party, silent while a track played on loop for hours. To outsiders, it looked like a man unraveling. But to Kanye, it may have been something else entirely. Cleansing, shedding the symbols of wealth, power, and acceptance, testing what remains when everything is gone. He spoke less of money and more of meaning, less of fashion and more of family. There were quiet moments with his children, with old friends who chose to stay, with strangers who saw not a star, but a man trying to remember who he was before the world told him who to be. Because that's the irony of Kanye West. For all his noise, his story is deeply human. A man desperate to be heard, then punished for being too loud. A man who chased the world, then rejected it when he saw what it truly cost. A man who had everything, and still felt hollow. And maybe, in some quiet corner of his mind, he had always known the truth. You don't own your voice if someone else owns your image. Now, his image was shattered. The brands were gone. The praise had stopped. But the voice? That was still his. And he was finally learning how to listen to it, not just broadcast it. He had spent years trying to change the world, but maybe the real revolution had to begin inside himself. The man once crowned the loudest in the room was becoming something far more dangerous. Still. And in that stillness, something sacred was beginning to rise. There's a strange quiet that follows a cultural explosion, the kind of silence that feels thicker than noise. It's not peace, it's aftermath. That's where Kanye West stood now. Not in the center of attention, but in the shadows of his own legacy, trying to understand what remained after the fire. What happens to a man when his name, once synonymous with success, becomes a cautionary tale? In corporate rooms, his face no longer appeared on mood boards or investor decks. In schools, his lyrics were edited out of classroom discussions. In fashion, the Yeezy wave had slowed to a ripple. And in music, newer artists no longer name-dropped him with admiration, only with confusion, even fear. Not because his talent faded, but because his image had been edited by consequence. Yet still, the influence lingered. You couldn't walk through a sneaker store without feeling his fingerprints on the shelves. You couldn't listen to modern hip-hop without catching a cadence, a sample, or a production choice that carried echoes of Kanye's early brilliance. His DNA was in the culture, whether the culture admitted it or not. But legacies are not built only by influence. They are shaped by how stories end. And Kanye's story wasn't finished, just fractured. Those who once studied him for inspiration now studied him for warnings. Financial advisors pointed to him when teaching about diversification and risk. PR firms used his interviews as examples of what not to say. Brands restructured contracts with clauses about personal conduct and social media activity, clauses unofficially known as Kanye clauses. It was as if the world had turned his name into a manual on how to fall. And yet, amidst the damage, there were moments, brief, fragile, but real, when Kanye seemed to understand something that few ever do. That to be truly free, you must be willing to lose the version of yourself that everyone else profits from. He wasn't just broke financially, he was broke open, split between the man the world consumed and the man who remained. There were rumors of new projects, whisperings of an independent clothing line, built without corporate backing, ideas about decentralized music platforms, faith-based education centers, spiritual retreats. None confirmed, all speculative. But even the speculation showed one thing: Kanye wasn't gone. He was evolving, slowly, painfully, without applause. In one rare moment, caught on a grainy fan video, Kanye was asked by a stranger outside a gas station, "Do you regret it?" He paused, looked the man in the eyes, and said, almost inaudibly, "No, because I spoke for myself, even if it cost everything." That's the part most people miss in stories like this. It's not just about numbers. It's not just about fame or followers. It's about agency, the right to define your own truth, even if no one wants to hear it. And in that truth, Kanye became something more than an artist, more than an icon. He became a mirror, not of perfection, but of the fragile tension between freedom and finance, expression and exile, profit and principle. He had touched everything: fashion, music, business, politics, religion, and in each space, he had refused to obey the rules. That's what made him magnetic, and ultimately, what made him dangerous. The world doesn't always punish lies, but it punishes those who say the wrong truth at the wrong time. And Kanye, for all his flaws, had always said his truth. Now, without filters, without handlers, without protection. So the question that remains, the one whispered in backrooms, on comment sections, in media circles, and among fans who still listen to the college dropout with tears in their eyes, is this: was it worth it? The dust has settled now. The headlines have moved on. The world, ever hungry for new scandals, new icons, new distractions, has turned its gaze elsewhere. But Kanye West, the man who once called himself a god, a genius, a cultural architect, remains, not in the spotlight, not on the charts, but in the background, like a deep bass note that still resonates long after the music has stopped. And maybe that's where his voice was always meant to echo, not above the noise, but beneath it, in the silence, in the questions that come after the downfall, in the truths we whisper to ourselves when no one's watching. Because Kanye's story isn't just about him, it's about all of us. It's about the price we pay for being honest, the risk we take when we refuse to conform, the fragile line between brilliance and self-destruction, and the world's love for icons, until those icons stop making us comfortable. He built empires and he watched them fall. He became a symbol, then a warning. He was praised as a prophet and crucified as a heretic, often by the same voices. But through it all, one thing remained constant. He refused to be edited, not by labels, not by media, not by fear, not even by himself. And maybe that's what scared the world the most. Not the chaos, not the controversy, but the unfiltered humanity of a man who had everything and was willing to lose it for the right to say what he believed, no matter the cost. In a society that rewards silence with comfort and obedience with wealth, Kanye chose neither. He chose the raw, jagged edge of self-expression. And that's where we leave him. Not as a billionaire, not as a fashion king, not even as a fallen star, but as a question. A man stripped of image, standing alone with nothing but his voice. Was he broken or freed? Was he lost or finally found? The answers don't lie in his bank account, his album sales, or his social media. They lie in the echo, in the space between fortune and fallout. And maybe that's what this story was really about. Not the rise, not the fall, but the truth in between. The truth that power doesn't always come from being loud. Sometimes it comes from having the courage to stay loud when the world tries to silence you. And so now, we ask you, the listener, the witness, what would you risk for your truth? Would you speak it, if it cost you everything?